and then I'll start to read some stuff. So thank you for taking part in 2021's DiverseU Building Community. Before we begin, I'd like to note that we are recording each session so that we can make them accessible after the event is over. Please keep this in mind as you engage in this space, as your questions and comments will be included in the recording. DiverseU is a celebration of diversity. I'm sure we're all eager to find out what can be learned by attending these events, but first, a few ground rules. The important student-led program creates learning spaces where people from various disciplines can facilitate discussions in an engaging academic setting. DiverseU is an opportunity to engage in civil discourse and dialogue through listening and learning. The ground rules are in place to assist our presenters in maintaining dignity and respect in those spaces. So here are a few guidelines for participating in the discussion and how we can better serve and respect this learning experience for everyone involved. Guideline 1 is communicate direct personal experience and not secondhand experiences. In doing so, we rely on I statements like I was affected by an incident where, and I know in my own life I experienced. Guideline 2, speak for yourself, not as a representative of any group or any other person. Along the same idea, do not single anyone out to be an expert in order to speak on behalf of any group. Guideline 3, if you do wish to reference studies outside your own experience, we invite you to cite academic studies collected from the various academic journals and databases available through the Mansfield Library. Guideline 4, be respectful and courteous throughout each presentation, whether you agree with the presenter or not. Our central mission here is civil discourse. Be mindful of the amount of space you're taking up and allow others to share in the dialogue. The 5th guideline is be mindful that many of the presenters are in a place of vulnerability due to the personal nature of each topic. As an Institute of Higher Learning, we depend on the Student Conduct Code to ensure each presenter is treated with dignity and respect. And the last guideline is active listening is more than hearing. It is expressed in our presence in the room. Based on this factor, we ask that while in the learning space, you silence your phone. If you do need to talk or text on your phone, we ask that you respectfully step outside of the meeting space to tend those communications. The same goes for Zoom. Please mute yourself unless you are speaking. So there you have it, 6 relatively simple guidelines and expectations for conduct in these spaces. These rules apply to individuals and groups that are not students, and we will enforce them should poor conduct occur from any person. Thank you for coming. And now I will introduce and turn it over to our amazing presenter to begin. This is Erin Baucom. She's an archivist and professor at the University of Montana, obviously. She received her master's in library science from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and is interested in digital curation, digital preservation, arrangement, and description of archival materials, among other things. I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Xavier. So the title of my presentation is Seeing Yourself in History. And that doesn't work. So see if that does. Nope. Let's see if I can actually get to the next slide. Yay, okay. So today I'm going to go over what an archive is, collections that are available here at the University of Montana, how to access archival material, and what needs to change in the archival process. I always like to start with a positionality statement, so you can understand my identity and experiences and how those experiences may affect my views and ideas about the subject of archives. I'm a white, bisexual, cisgender female with a hidden disability. I'm 32 years old and grew up mainly in Virginia and North Carolina in a stable 2-parent upper middle class household. I have many privileges that have eased my way in life and few challenges. These privileges affect how I do my work as an archivist and how I see the world. I've done an extensive amount of self-education into anti-racism specifically, and diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility broadly in an effort to counter my internal biases. and privileged view of the world. I am by no means an expert on everything I'm presenting today, and I acknowledge that I'm still learning and still getting things wrong. So this is an ever evolving and developed area of archival studies. And so what I say today may be incorrect 10 years down the line, or even tomorrow. So this is the laundry list of things an archive could be. A physical or digital collection of historical records, a FONS, which is a very specific type of archive, an individual record of continuing value, so on and so forth. These all come from the Dictionary of Archives Terminology, which is published by the Society of American Archivists. You'll notice that most of these definitions mention a record. So, what is a record? A potential evidence of human activity that travels through space and time. Records are central to the identities, relevance, and effectiveness of organizations and to their relationships of trust and engagement with their communities. So records are extremely important. So this is an archive. This is what we traditionally think of an archive as. Shelves full of boxes, literally in a basement. This is also an archive. This is the University Archives Facebook and Twitter accounts. Every post you put to Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, any kind of social media is you creating a record of your experiences. So this counts as an archive. This is also an archive. This is my grandmother. She knows all about our family history and loves to share it. Her knowledge and her sharing of that knowledge is the creation of a record. So these are what we think of as our collections at the University of Montana. Writ broadly, there's examples of photographs, digital objects, books, audiovisual material, and of course, documents. We maintain the record and history of the university, including student groups. So on here, you can see at the top, I don't know which way this is facing, sorry. The top is the Coral Averill scrapbook, which is a very popular piece of university history. A picture from one of our Kiayo powwows, an actual Kiayo program, a program from a football game in 1913, a photograph from our Black Student Union collection, and some other things that are student and university history. At the very bottom is actually one of the biannual president's reports. Beyond university history, we document the history of Western Montana. So we have maps, we have fire insurance books that are very large. They take up a whole like 8-foot table when they're open. We have architectural drawings and even archival objects. I thought everyone might enjoy the picture of some of our beer bottles in our collection. We also have a fairly wide range of rare books. The one on this screen is a picture from our 1561 Chaucer, which is the oldest book we have in the library. So why are archives important? Why do you care? Well, it can certainly be argued that no form of documentation can ever be value neutral. Bureaucratic records must also be considered in terms of the ways in which they are central to the exercise of power and agency, as well as how they are aligned with the interests of certain bodies and exclusive notions of evidence, nation states, and citizenry. Archives determine what a document is. Archives determine what a record is, what evidence is. If there is no evidence, there is no trial. So if you can think about it in terms of a jury trial or being in court, archives have paved the way to what is admissible. And that's just in legal terms. It's also what paves the way in what's admissible in your history class. If you have to go to your professor and they ask you for a primary source, they're asking you from something from an archive. So what exists extant in the archives either an official institutional archive like the one at the University of Montana, or a community archive that may exist at your church, maybe at your local community center. Those determine what becomes written about history. Archival appraisal decides what creators, functions, and activities generating records will be represented in archives by defining, identifying, and then selecting which documents and which media become archives in the first place. If it's not an archive, however you define that term, it doesn't exist in history except as a silence, as an absence. And while we can examine those absences from a historical point of view to say there should be something here, and that actually has value to tell a story, you're still missing part of your identity because you can't see yourself there. You can't pull up that picture that says that person looks like me, or that person is from my culture, or this is my history. It's a very personal experience that helps build your identity. So how do you access collections? Here at the University of Montana, you can come into our reading room. There's a photo of that there. You can go online to our institutional repository, ScholarWorks, and view a lot of our digitized collections of university publications. You can go to the Digital Public Library of America, which holds digitized collections from all 50 states and some international collections. You can do a Google search and get to the Bodleian over at Oxford. I mean, it really depends on how much effort and time you're willing to put into it. But if you want to touch history, if you want to be in the presence of the papers and the writings and the photographs, come into the archives, or even your local archives, wherever you may be. I'm not going to be as insane to think everybody right now is in Missoula, Montana. So your church has an archive. Your community center has an archive. Your family has an archive. Look through your old scrapbooks and photo albums. That's how you can see yourself in history. So I'm going to do a little bit of a turn and talk about critical archival studies. So when thinking about terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, the newly named field of critical archival studies is providing a roadmap. I say it's newly named because this work has been done for decades across various disciplines working in concert with archivists. Critical archival studies is a combination of critical theory and archival studies. Archival studies, as defined by Michelle Caswell, interrogates how records contribute to what is wrong with the world, how records can be used to change those wrongs, and who can make those changes. Critical theory gives us an analysis of power in all of its forms that is crucial to understand the context of records creation, of archival functions, of the formation of archival institutions, of outreach and advocacy, and who becomes an archivist and how. How we define and teach and practice how to become an archivist. Power permeates every aspect of the archival endeavor. There is no neutral in archives. A critical theory analysis is crucial for understanding how this power operates, through whom and why, and for building new archival practices that liberate human potential rather than oppress it. Critical archival studies is unapologetically emancipatory in nature. So what needs to change? Organizations create documentation not to file away in an archive, but to actively support their ongoing programs. Organizations and individuals recognize that documentation has historical and research value, but it also represents immediate operational, symbolic, evidential, legal, political, memorial, and other values that would be lost or diminished if the original records were transferred away from their organization. So, archivists have recognized that there is a relationship between archives and performed cultural heritage, which suggests that records can be embodied, which is to say, cultural memory endures and is transmitted through human bodies, and that archivists should consider new ways of thinking about archival permanence and privilege, and the privilege we give to Western modes of record keeping and communication. There's been a growing interest in community-based and participatory archives, due in large part to the increasing recognition that people and communities need to be empowered to make decisions about how their histories are documented and preserved. So today I wanted to discuss with the community writ large, wherever you may be, what the archives could be doing better. How can we engage you to come in and look at the history of the university? How can we include you in the history of the university? And that doesn't mean taking your stuff, especially in the digital age. It makes it so much easier to have a participatory archive because I can have a copy of your organizational records to add to our archive while you keep all of the originals. And yet you're still a part of the history of the university, of the official institutional record that says you were here, you were amazing, and look at what you did. So with that, I will open it up to questions and discussion. We have lots of time.
We have lots of time. So let me pull up a chair.
Mhm.
I can moderate some questions. Thank you very much. That was very interesting and very enlightening. I see there's 13 or 14 of us here. If you have questions, please feel free to type them in the chat, or if you'd raise your hand, you can do that and I can certainly call on you. And we'll just provide some silence. I know sometimes people like to chat, type stuff out, and that can take a little bit of time. Looks like Nathan has a question. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Erin. Thanks for that great presentation. It's exciting to see the different options that are available and the resources. I'm curious how the funding for the archives have changed over the years at or what you foresee for the future.
So I'm not the head of the archives. I don't have access to all of our historical documentation considering funding. The archives is part of the University of Montana Maureen and Mike Mansfield Library. We are part of the funding stream that is funded by the library. As the library's budget has been reduced, so therefore has the archives budget has been reduced. We've lost staff and we haven't been able to replace them. We've actually transitioned a lot of ongoing needs onto endowment funds. We've had some very generous donors that specifically earmarked funding for the archives. That is unsustainable. If the archives is to continue on in a sustainable manner, then it needs more stable funding. And that has to come through a budget line through the library.
Thank you, Erin. That's helpful.
Thanks, Nathan.
Thank you, Nathan.
I have a quick question that's related to the archives and tangentially to your presentation. I know that the archives is part of a project with the Missoula County to document COVID-19 as kind of a phenomenon and an experience that this community is going through. And certainly I'm sure has big impacts on digital preservation and digital curation. I was wondering if you could speak to that project and kind of let our audience know what that is all about.
So the minute Missoula County shut down in March of 2020, an effort was started by cultural heritage institutions in Missoula to document the experiences of as many different people in the county as we could. When I say cultural heritage institutions, I'm talking about the museum at the fort, so the Fort Missoula Museum, the Downtown History Preservation Association, historical museums in Sealy Swan Lake and other outlying areas, the university writ large, the history department. All of these people came together to say this needs to happen. This needs to be documented as it happens. So we wanted businesses, businesses' experiences, individual student experiences, the experience of the homeless and the providers of the hospitals and the schools and teachers. So we started in March 2020, and we laid out a roadmap of how it was going to go and set up an individual submission page through the university library that individuals could submit materials. And we got quite a few submissions that way. And then slowly, as the pandemic eased and things started opening up, we reframed the project to say, now what? Because we collected our institutional materials, right? Of what we've been doing during COVID. All of the university's efforts have been carefully documented by me because it's all on a website, funnily enough. So we actually had to up our website subscription because we subscribe to a service that helps us document the web materials of the campus. And the county made the decision to fund an archive. So we have funding for 3 years for a digital platform that will allow us to gather all these disparate materials that are all over the county into one location, describe them, and present them online for users. And I, as the digital archivist for campus and the consultant for the project, will be managing that piece of the puzzle. So it's going to take a lot of work, but we're really excited to be able to promote this end user experience where people can see what others have gone through.
Yeah, and I bring it up because I think it's such an example of how you can try to be inclusive with archival work, you know, and really bring it to the community and open it up that way. Definitely seems like a project that has lots of room to grow. So
we hope it will grow.
looks like Kristen has a question. Go ahead.
Kristen, you're unmuted, but we can't hear you.
Okay, Kristen is going to try
To chat.
chat. Kristen asked if Erin can talk a little bit more about archival silence.
Sure. So archival silence is,
So let me stop you before you begin, and how we see that in examples in the archival collection at UL.
so there are two versions of archival silence, and there's deliberate silence where communities have refused to submit their materials to official archival institutions. In that way, the community is saying, we don't trust you with our history. We don't trust you with our culture. And there's very valid reasons why that would occur. The archives, the Western Archives corpus was developed by white upper class men and is currently managed mostly by white females. If you look at the statistics of who an archivist is. So the colonial Western perspective is what is generating and creating archives at the moment. That means that those that have been colonized or have experienced slavery do not feel that they belong in the archives of Western power, which is understandable. The other kind of archival silence is the indeliberate silences, because who ran the archives and who currently runs archives determines what is collected. It was thought that the only things to collect were rich white men, right? We've heard this refrain before in other humanities and sciences, is that the only people cited are these white guys, right? The old white guys, the old white guy club. So studying where the gaps are when you know there was an influential female figure, but you can't find her writings, you can't find her history, or you know anecdotally that there was an Indigenous person that did so much for a community, and yet they're not represented anywhere. That is a silence that you can examine and say, this is what was missed by the official history. Let me tell this story in another way. Let me use a different cultural approach. In our collections, we're missing student voices for sure, especially contemporary student voices. Some of that is because the archives has not had the staffing to do the kind of outreach to campus that we would love to be able to do, to say, this is who we are, this is what we do, and this is how we can partner to have your materials available for the future, right? There's just not been the ability. I have trainings for it, I have created things to help do that. It just has been a fact of too few people, not enough time. We're missing student voices, we're missing staff voices. I mean, we have a lot of the faculty archives, like individual faculty members and the faculty senate records. We have administrator perspectives from the official records that the university generates. But what's the staff experience at the university? How are they day to day doing their work, meeting each other, having fun outside of what they do, making changes to how the institution runs? That's a perspective that's missing too.
Maybe a quick follow-up to that that I have is, do archives ever do kind of collection audits to see what is missing, where they could expand? What does that process look like if that is the case?
That has been a very recent, that was kind of like the first diversity push, right? The very first diversity push was saying, all of this is missing from the historical record, or at least our historical record, right? So how can we collect it? How can we fill those historical gaps? And that absolutely is being done by institutions. It's being done by communities who are saying, we don't see ourselves here, so we're gonna collect our own. One of the greatest examples of that is the Densho archives that is documenting the history of the Japanese internment camps. There's another archives, SADA, it's the South, I'm gonna say this wrong, but it's Asian American experience, Asian American immigrant experiences, that has a beautiful digital archives that kind of paved the way for how we do community archiving now. Don't Sheet Portland has a great example of that too. So a lot of communities are filling their own gaps, and then the archivists are partnering to provide experience, provide a backup, provide, say, wait, hey, you have duplicates, we'll take them, to send as much of this, to save as much of this information as possible.
Yeah. Thanks. Any other questions from anybody in the audience? Yeah, I counted to 10 seconds. So if you do have questions, please raise your hand if you're trying to type them out. But seeing as we don't have any, I just want to thank, first of all, Erin, for presenting, and for all of you that have come to attend. Thank you for coming virtually and in person. Erin, if anybody has questions after the fact that they think of, what's the best way that they could reach out to you?
Email. I'm much more likely to respond to email than anything else.
Great. And is that just Erin.Baucom at
umontana.edu?
Great.
Yeah. Or same last name, UMontana.
Sounds good. Okay, well, thank you very much for everybody for coming. I'm going to stop the recording, and you are all free to